joining us on Packer Transplants.
So I got no audio from you guys.
Oh no!
I got you, Aaron. I don't have
No.
Corey.
Oh,
Nice.
I
don't
have
have
you,
well.
Aaron. I
That's
don't have
probably
Corey.
that's
That's
probably
all
for the
right.
best.
That's fine.
That's probably the
Yeah.
way it should be. I mean, if you really need to hear someone, it's definitely not Benke. How are you? You look amazing. You look sun-kissed, like you're enjoying your summer. How you doing there, Brian?
Yeah, doing great. Yeah, a little sunburnt from the 14-year-old baseball that I'm chasing around at the moment right now. I'm being out at OTA practices and mini camp today. So no, good time of year. Obviously, got one more practice tomorrow left, and before these guys get out of here. And just it's been a good spring, and we're excited to I think the hard part's gonna be waiting the next 4 or 5 weeks to get to training camp.
Is that a big hold your breath sequence every offseason? As far as now, obvious, I'm not saying that he's bad dudes on the roster or anything like that, but I feel like it's inevitable in your position where just please don't let my phone ring at like 3 a.m. or something like that.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that, but I think for the most part, we got a really, really good group of guys, and I don't have a whole lot of concerns there. But that's part of it. Sometimes guys stub their toes, but hopefully this offseason is a good one.
So how are the rookies looking comparison to your vets? As far as, we go through the draft, everyone gets really excited about a lot of new Green Bay Packers, right? And then you finally get them on the field with your veteran players. And I know pads are a ways away from coming on, but first blush, how is the crew looking on a field with NFL competition?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the thing that I always look for during this time of year is how they're fitting in, how they're learning. I think you got to be careful of the evaluation process during the spring, only because everything is so new to these guys. At the same time, you're always kind of keeping an eye. Do they look like the guys we thought they were prior to the selections? And then maybe we signed some guys after the draft, and these guys have fit in really, really well. Not only athletically and what the coaches are asking these guys to do, but and then I think just from a culture fit, and again, it's early. They're still getting used to the way we do things around here, but there's a lot of buy-in. I think that goes, a lot of credit to our coaching staff, but then also our current players, and the way they embrace these guys coming in. So again, this is it's a work time. It's a time to get better, kind of get that foundation laid for this season. And they've done a good job so far. And I think we're excited to get to training camp into the season.
I'm glad you brought up, you mentioned the undrafted crew, right? And the last couple of years, I think, what was it, last year you had like 14, and the year before that you had 12 undrafted guys. And this year, I think it's only 8 as far as you're undrafted.
Yep.
And I know the roster was at a different spot coming into the draft, obviously, and then you make 11 selections. Is that something where, I know in the past you've talked about kind of taking pride in the idea that an undrafted guy gets a shot in Green Bay, right? But you've had a guy from the undrafted group make the squad pretty much every year for the last, I don't know how many years. Is that something you're concerned about, or is that something that's just where the way the numbers kind of shook out this season?
Yeah, and I think it's really the way the numbers shook out this year more than anything. Undrafted free agency is a very big part of our roster building, philosophy. We've had a lot of great success with it in years past. Some significant players have come from that group, as you guys know. So I think, our numbers were higher going into the draft this year than they normally are. And it's a good problem to have because there was none of those guys that we were really looking to move on from. There were guys we really liked, wanted to continue to develop. So, and I do think the overall volume in this year's draft class, when you include the undrafted free agents, was a little less maybe in some years. I think it has a little bit to do with the COVID years and the transfer portal. And I think we'll see those numbers spike in the next couple of years. But I think it had a little bit to do with that. So I was a little bit more comfortable with it. At the same time, I really like some of the guys we acquired, and I certainly expect them to push to make the team and help this team moving forward.
You did have a pretty significant youth movement last year where you had obviously a number of guys contribute on offense who were thrust into action right away. You kind of lived with some growing pains, right? I don't know if this was by design, but it sure feels like you want to try and take a similar approach on defense this year with the numbers you've brought in at safety and linebacker. You got to suspect they're going to have opportunities, but you're probably going to live with similar growing pains. I think that might be fair to say. Was that a conscious choice, or is that just kind of how the draft fell for you?
A little bit how the draft fell for us, but at the same time, I do think, I think if there's anything over that Matt and I together, as we've worked through this thing, have learned is that we have to create opportunities for young players to play. Certainly there's a lot of um, getting better through practice and preseason, but guys got to go out there in the National Football League and play to get better. And I think you do have to live through some of that stuff if you want to get the best out of those players. Um, so I think, and the salary cap, I think also plays a part in that, and how every team kind of has to construct it. I mean, the young players are going to have to play, and they're going to have to take on pretty big roles for you. And I think certainly last year it worked out and at the end in some really nice ways. And we'll expect these young guys to kind of come in and put in the same kind of work that those guys did last year, and hopefully see some of those fruits of their labor down the road.
Now, getting off the rookies and the youth for a minute, I want to go back a couple years to, obviously I don't expect you to comment on any specific reports, but there is something that I want to address as far as you really seem to have been linked with a number of guys in the past that you maybe were interested in acquiring that you didn't end up landing. And I just thought of this because Darren Waller was in the news recently, having retired. You were linked to him. You were linked to Chase Claypool and Will Fuller. Again, I know you're not going to specifically talk about those guys, but it seems in each of those instances, you reached a point as the general manager where you were like, this is the value I place on this player, and I'm not going to budge from that. And I would be interested in acquiring him, but I'm not going to go above my price. What is it? Is there a metric? Is there something specific you look at? Or, what is it you're doing there to place that value where you're like, this is my line and I'm not going to deviate from it, because it seems to have served you really well, given how these guys went on to other places and didn't seem to really flourish.
Yeah, I think you certainly have to have a walk away point. We're all competitive in this business. When you get into those environments, when you're trying to acquire a player, you got to keep a level head. And I think as you go into something like that, you need to have a walk away point ahead of time. I think that serves you well. Certainly, I learned that from Ted Thompson and Ron Wolf. I think a lot of times too with the Packers, because we don't, our guys kind of keep things in house pretty well. So the agent community certainly uses us as being involved in a lot of things that we may or may not be.
No.
But I do.
The hell you say.
Right. But I do think, and whenever you're looking at acquiring a player or contract negotiations, I think you got to put a lot of time and preparation into where your walk away point is, and then try to stay disciplined to that. Otherwise, I think in the heat of the competition and the moment, you can make mistakes.
Speaking of valuations of players, specifically veteran players, I don't know how else to ask this. Other than I want to lead. I want to.
You're gonna not like the fact that you got me on audio. So no, just
I've got to lead into this question that I think I hope frames it correctly. Brian, I've been covering quote unquote whatever you want to call it, Cheesehead TV, the Packers since 2007. In that time, I think I've gotten a good handle on first Ted and now you when it comes to what you say publicly in regards to players and contracts and what you're thinking. Oh, we're definitely going to do that, and we're not going to do this. It sure felt like I read you wrong, and maybe a lot of fans read you wrong when it came to Aaron Jones, because you did say absolutely he will be back. And then you look at the way you spoke about Aaron, and then you juxtapose that with the way you spoke about David Bakhtiari. It was night and day, right? Like the David stuff was very clear that, okay, there's a good chance you're going to let him go. You end up letting him go. Did something happen with Jones? Did something happen with Drew? Was there a promise made that wasn't kept as far as taking a pay cut? Like, it just seemed really out of character for you to say something so definitive and then to not have it happen.
Yeah, well, first of all, nothing happened. There was no, Aaron obviously is as first class as it gets, and so is his agent, Drew Rosenhaus. We have great relationships with both those guys. At the time, but that was my expectation, and that's kind of how I said it. I absolutely expected Aaron to be back with us. That was kind of the intention. We knew there were some things to go through and some hurdles. And as I think we went through those just became harder than expected for me. And again, I think that's the one thing we talk about all the time is the NFL landscape is kind of always changing, and as it changes, we have to adapt to it. And that's really what happened. Is that the the landscape changed. We weren't able to kind of come to an agreement that we thought we might be able to with Aaron. And then, quite frankly, some opportunities opened up that we didn't expect as well. And when those things happen, for me, as hard as that is emotionally when you're attached to a player like Aaron and everything he's done for the club, you got to do what's right for the Green Bay Packers. And, I've had great examples of that in my career as I worked under, Ron and Ted. And certainly I feel I owe that to the organization.
Brian, so Cheesehead TV, I don't know if you know this, we've been around for 17
here we
years, believe it or not. And in those 17 years, okay, Aaron Nagler and I have argued incessantly about whether you should draft a specialist, namely a punter or a kicker, in the draft. So with me thinking there is incredibly no value in doing that, you waste your value. And over 17 years now, right? We spent a lot of hot air. I mean, we have a lot of hot air to give, I'll be honest with you, but we spent a lot of hot air on this subject. And, now that we have you, my question is, kickers and punters, why draft them?
Well, I'll say this: it always comes down to the player, right? I mean, Mason Crosby's a pretty good pick, so it always comes down to the player and whether they excel or not, whether it's worth it. I get your point, because certainly there's been a ton of great kickers that have come out of the undrafted kind of pool, and I do think more so maybe for kickers than punters, but it does take a little while to get used to kicking in the NFL, and it takes some time to get over that hurdle. You've seen a number of really good kickers come through this league that didn't make it in their first or second stop that end up, finding their way along the way. So I think there's some merit to that. At the same time, I think a lot of it ends up just coming down to your kind of expectation and your football team and how you think that particular player can help you. I'm not afraid to do it. I mean, obviously, I've drafted a snapper, a kicker, a punter, I think at least in my time. I know that, and going back in years past, we've done that before. So I just think a lot of it ends up coming down to what the board looks like at the time. And if you have them rated high enough, I think, it's well worth it. I do think, the days of Ray Guy going in the first round, I don't know if you're going to see that very often anymore. But
Janikowski, right?
Yeah. I think they're all important, particularly kickers. I mean, they score points, and that's an exceptionally important thing.
We'd be remiss if we didn't ask you a couple of hard-hitting contract questions, because I know that's what you're looking forward to here. That's why you come on Cheesehead TV. Your quarterback was in the locker room a little while ago, pretty tight-lipped about the contract situation, but he did indicate that he's pretty optimistic that something's going to get done sooner rather than later. I know you were on the radio a week or so ago talking about how you wanted to get it done before camp. I think that's obviously realistic. Are you doing the Ted thing here, or you already got it in the bag and you're just waiting for the first day of camp to announce it? Is that what's up?
I wish that was the case. I mean, I'd love to have it done a couple weeks ago. That'd be great, right? Because I think the stability at quarterback, and particularly with Jordan, I think would be something that's good for the organization, good for our team. I think I'm optimistic because I think both we want Jordan here. Jordan wants to be here, and certainly there's a desire on both sides to get something done. Would love to have it done before training camp. I think that would be ideal. Whether or not that happens, we'll just kind of see how that goes. I think Russ is doing a tremendous job. His relationship with David Mulugeta and their people is really, really strong. So these things take time and none of them go real fast. So I'm not overly concerned, but I think for all parties involved, we'd love to have it done before training camp, but we'll kind of see how that goes. But I think more importantly is the fact that, we have an opportunity here to, kind of take the quarterback position, make it very stable for us for the foreseeable future. And that's exciting.
Speaking of that, how excited are you to get this done and not have to be asked about your quarterback's contract, which it seems like you've spent every offseason for the past 3 or 4 years getting asked?
Yeah. Well, obviously, everybody knows how important they are, to winning. And so I guess I'm kind of just used to it now, and it doesn't bother me at all. I think if you're talking about a quarterback contract, it means you have one, and that's a good thing. And we certainly do. So, I think that's all positive stuff.
And then on the defensive side of the ball, Kenny Clark is sitting there, reaching the final year of his contract. I know there were a number of interior defensive linemen signed to extensions over the course of the offseason already. And I think he was quoted in the locker room earlier today talking about how he would love to retire as a Packer. Obviously, it would be a third contract, which is something you guys have been pretty kind of reticent to do. I got two questions there. One, are you talking with Kenny's people? And two, does the way David Bakhtiari's kind of third contract played out, does that give you any pause, reticence? Does that scare you off a little bit?
Yeah. As far as Kenny's concerned, we'd love to keep Kenny around. We'll kind of see how all that goes as we move forward here. But, it's crazy to think that he's only 28 years old with the amount of football he's played for us. I mean, he started so young. And so as it relates to your second question with the third contract, I think that plays a little bit of a part for us. It's just the fact that he's a little bit younger than most third contract guys are. And then he's been very, very durable for us over that time. So I think that's something as we go forward here, we're gonna look to see if we can do. Again, I think it's all got to fit, and certainly Jordan's contract, getting that done and kind of knowing how that is structured and how that sits over the next few years will be important. But Kenny still playing at a very, very high level, one of our team leaders. We'd certainly like to have him around for a number of years.
We're talking to Packers general manager Brian Gutekunst. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Corey.
we're doing the reset. I just I have this question, Brian, as I'm a business entrepreneur and I have a company in Green Bay. And one of the things that's been coming up in my life is kind of like thinking about, I kind of just have this, I just was thinking about like your job depends on you making a series of bets that are well thought out bets, but you make a series of bets every year. And, I have personally, as a business owner, I have a lot of things where I made bets and they didn't really work out. And a lot of times I spend time on the past. And I feel like every time I listen to you in a press conference, you're really thinking about moving forward and moving forward. I just kind of have a personal question because for me, especially recently, I think a lot about decisions I've made and how they've impacted where I got to this moment. And I think in the past, I've thought about that and said, you know what, only focus on that if you can learn something from it. So I guess my question is, how often do you think about like how you got here and how you're going to get to the next place? And how often do you just go, you know what, I either didn't make the right decision or I didn't do this thing and I'm just going to focus on the next thing. Does that make sense? That makes sense.
Yeah,
the question
no,
is
it does.
terrible question.
No, and I think you kind of said it in there too. I think, certainly your mistakes, you want to study them a little bit. So you make sure you try not to make those mistakes more than once. But we don't bet because, gambling, we can't do that in the National Football
That's illegal in Wisconsin, sir.
There's a bunch
Oh,
of
not in
Illegal at Bushwood.
right. But there's a bunch of, decisions and risks that you have to take all the time. And I think, in this business, just like most, I mean, they're not all going to work out. You have to be able to, kind of like just move forward. And I think probably blessed with that nature just from my mother. And like, she's just, very optimistic about, how you're looking at things in the moment and going forward. But I do think, it's always, it's good to reflect on the mistakes, to try to learn from, those things. But I'm really way more focused on, the here and now and where we're going. This thing moves pretty fast. And I just think if you spend too much time looking backwards, you're going to miss something.
I appreciate that. I needed that, actually. That was like a personal thing I needed. I wasn't trying to get any gotcha. I just personally needed that today from the general manager of the Green Bay Packers. So I need to move forward with my BS. Thank you.
Brian, you're an absolute legend for joining us. I only have one more question. I don't know if Corey's exhausted his now. If
I've
he wants to
exhausted
berate
my
you about
questions.
kickers. But one final question
We
for
can
you.
talk about that.
But one final question. I know you made mention of it, your wrap-up presser at the end of the draft. You talked about, obviously the draft is coming to Green Bay next year, and you were asked about the presentation in Detroit and the vibe and everything. And you mentioned how great it was watching the people announcing the picks. I believe there was one gentleman in particular, there was an Englishman, I think, who announced one of the picks, and it was so much fun.
Yeah.
In that vein, my question to you is, can you put in a word to have Corey Banke announce a draft pick next year in Green Bay?
I'll have the gloves ready, Brian. I'll have the gloves ready.
Well, I'm a little disappointed. I mean, I'm like right across the street. If I'd have known you were there, I mean, it'd be much easier for me just to join you, right? I mean, that'd be a lot
Yeah,
easier.
I can give you a tour of my garden. Everybody on
Right?
YouTube wanted me to give you a tour of my garden. So come on over, have a beer.
I will absolutely put in a good word. I think Mark Murphy is probably the guy to do that with. I think the one thing about the draft, it's funny, I've gotten a lot of questions about it. and it's so funny because I'm not going to be involved in any of that stuff with the exception of what we're doing with the picks and all that. But I think it's such a fascinating thing for the city. It's so good. And there's so many people around this building that are excited about it. And it seems like as I'm in the community, people are just really fired up, for everything that's going to be. And just really cool that Mark and his team was able to accomplish that, because that's a big deal.
It's going to
Very
be
big
awesome.
deal.
It's going to be a week-long party, and I cannot wait to be
It's gonna
part
be
of
awesome.
it. It's going to be so much fun. Brian, cannot thank you enough for joining us, man. Really appreciate the time. Good luck this season. Have a great whatever you can of this summer, and we'll see you at training camp.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on, and I really do appreciate what you guys do for our fans, because it's a great show. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Have a
Super
great day.
Bowl, Brian. Super Bowl. Let's do it,
Oh.
baby. Let's go.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brian.